Welcome to the very first episode of In Dialogue. The host here is a well-known gentleman from this community, from this area, by the name of Mr. Bharat Bhargav. He's actually no stranger to GTV, as he has made his appearance here actually on several of our shows in the past few months and actually the past few years. Well, finally, he is here to offer his lovely services for you and I. Like I said, his segment is called In Dialogue, and he's going to be hosting this segment once a month. This month, he has a good-looking guest beside him, and his name is Mr. Anish Chopra. What is Mr. Chopra up to these days? Let's get in the warm company of Mr. Bhargav and his guest, Mr. Anish Chopra.
Discussing important civic matters is one of the aspects of our program In Dialogue. And today I am pleased to introduce to you Mr. Anish Chopra, who is running for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. It is my special privilege to introduce Anish. You know, from the 60s till 1990, when my wife Yog and I moved to Washington, Anish's father Ram Chopra and mother Neelam Chopra were among our closest friends. I have seen Anish and his sister Monica since their birth. And you know, something I remember very special about Ram, he was an engineer and an inventor, but he had a unique passion for civic matters, and he was very focused and knowledgeable. And both his mother and father were ultimate charmers. So Anish has gotten in his DNA some of the very rare qualities that politicians need to have. But he has cultivated it further. He went to Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. And I have to tell you, many years ago, I made a prediction about Anish, and I can see the trend line building. He worked for a prominent Washington think tank. Then he became the Secretary of Technology for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I have known he worked very closely with Senator Mark Warner on many technology matters. And then, of course, we were all very proud when President Obama named him America's first CTO. And for 3 years, we observed the wonderful things he was doing. And in fact, when he was ready to leave, I'll tell you what the president said. You don't wing when you're quoting a president, so I'm going to read it. He said, Anish's legacy of leadership and innovation will benefit Americans for years to come. And I thank him for his outstanding service. Anish lives in Virginia with his lovely wife, Rohini, and two beautiful daughters, Naya and Devan. And they have made commitment to improve the lives of and the well-being of Virginians and hopefully to all Americans. I did say he was born in US, if you get my drift. With that, I would like to welcome you, Anish. And you know, I'm going to continue calling you Anish, but I'd be most happy in November to start calling you Mr. Governor.
Thank you very much.
It's such a pleasure to have you. And you know, Anish, I am so proud that the accomplishments you have made so far. And a lot of people have opinions about politics, but we all know politics is the raw material that democracy is made of. So when I see technically competent people like you going into politics, as one citizen, I can tell you I'm very happy to see that happening. So let's start with the big picture. What are your top priorities as you run for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia?
Well, before I get into that, I want to just say to our viewers, I'm honored to be the first guest for the In Dialogue program. As many of you know, Bharat Uncle has been a trailblazer in our community. He was among our first batch of political appointees to demonstrate what's possible when we can contribute and give back to this great country. He inspired me and generations like me to get involved. So to be your first guest on your show is a bit humbling, and I thank you for that privilege.
My pleasure.
Now on to the discussion that you raised. I'm running to make the Commonwealth better, faster, and fairer for all Virginians. If I take a look at the year 2020 and I look at our economy, I see three big changes.
Okay.
First, that we have a workforce that's ready to work for any job opening that's available in Virginia on day one. There are too many open jobs in Virginia, even now, amongst many of our friends who are willing to hire but can't find the talented workforce. Second, we know that small businesses are the engine of our economy, and a subset of small businesses are new businesses, companies that are less than 5 years old. By the year 2020, I want Virginia to move from being not even in the top 20 states, but in the top 5 states, welcoming, nurturing, and supporting new businesses that will thrive and grow. Finally, I understand that our diversity in our society is an asset. Yet in our economic leadership, we haven't seen as many women, minorities, and immigrants atop the economic ladder. I would love Virginia's economy in 2020 to reflect our diversity in our social lives, and that means support services and programs to make sure that women, minorities, and immigrants can be as successful in our economic structures as they are in our civic life. So this is the 3 visions that I see for Virginia by 2020.
That's so wonderful. I applaud you for the lofty and laudable goals that you have. As you and I know, governments do not create enterprises, but governments can create enabling environment. And I know you did that during your work at the White House, but also that seems to be your vision. Could you perhaps address on how you expect to support small businesses and to make new businesses grow in Virginia?
So, as you mentioned, government's role is to create the enabling environment. And to clarify that, there are 3 things that we can do better in the public sector. First, we make investments in the building blocks of innovation. Traditionally, that meant roadways, railways, and runways. But in the 21st century economy, a knowledge-driven economy, that means having a workforce second to none. It also means investments in research and development to create the jobs and industries of the future. So these investments help to create the conditions for more successful small businesses.
Okay.
Second, we need to create rules of the road that promote innovation and entrepreneurship. And the most important one now is making it easier for entrepreneurs to raise capital so that they have the fuel they need to succeed. And last but not least, there are segments of the American economy that have not been as welcoming for startups. These are segments that happen to be a little bit more driven by regulation or government. I believe by breaking down barriers, we can make it easier for entrepreneurs to break into healthcare, energy, education markets, and dare I say the government itself, as areas where these startups can thrive. So the answer to the question is, what can we do for small businesses? We create the enabling environment. In addition to the enabling environment, and we'll talk about this, I am very proud of initiatives like Startup Virginia, which I helped launch with Steve Case in January of 2012, that to this day has over 600 Virginia businesses enrolled, connecting to over $1 billion of support services, mentorship, and resources so they can compete and thrive. A true public-private partnership with 0 taxpayer dollars. We'll initiate programs like Startup Virginia and put them to scale.
Well, in my work internationally, I find the financing of small business and startups is the biggest impediment. Does the startup have a financial component to it?
The president signed into law the Jobs Act, a bipartisan piece of legislation that drew from both parties. In Virginia, we should be proud. Our great Senator Mark Warner and Congressman Eric Cantor joined forces to unleash the opportunities for startups. The new law, the Jobs Act, makes it easier for companies to raise capital. For more established companies, it makes them easier for them to go public. For companies that are in that early stage that have got some customers and are ready to thrive, they can increase their capital from private markets. And last but certainly not least, for those brand new startups, they have the ability to crowdfund their business for the first time in American history. So Bharat Uncle, you and I can chip in $100, $1,000, $5,000, pool those resources and give that first jump start to that entrepreneur ready to get out the gate. This, we believe, will unleash $300 billion of capital nationwide. And if Virginia gets its act together right, we can do a better job here than any other state.
Well, this crowdfunding is, of course, perhaps a very new term for a lot of people. And we realize that generally for providing finance for companies, you need prospectus and very elaborate process. Is there anything just to make it humanly more interesting for people to understand what crowdfunding is? I know you already gave the overview, but just a little bit more if you
Absolutely.
wanted to drill down a little further.
There are websites already from companies like AngelList that are run actually by an Indian American, Naval Ravikant, that give you a flavor for what crowdfunding will mean in Virginia and in the rest of the country. A company registers with these websites, presents a prospectus, not as detailed as an S1, which you need to go public on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, but a document that provides information with videos and other materials so that an investor and a follower or an interested party can learn about your company and what you're doing. What happens next, Bharat Uncle, is that the social networking takes effect. If I see that Bharat Uncle is following a company, then that piques my interest. Well, what's caught his attention?
Wow.
Maybe I want to know the list of companies that you're following, and maybe I might choose to invest in only in those that happen to have gotten your blessing, because I trust you. This dynamic will start to emerge, and what that means is that communities that have had a hard time raising capital from traditional systems can now create new models. I believe women can have support systems online to make it easier for them to raise capital. Immigrant founders, the same thing. Even university alumni. So if I went to George Mason or the University of Virginia, there might be an alumni network to say, let's celebrate our graduates who've got startups featured on these websites. So this new dynamic will emerge. We've not even seen the possibilities because up until this point, it has been illegal for a company to raise money online without going through the formal stock exchange systems. That wall is coming down, crowdfunding is coming in, and that's giving us a lot of opportunity.
So with proper protections, I suspect this crowdfunding could be both of interest to those who want to make a small investment and those who want to start businesses.
It's both, and I think what we're going to see in Virginia is that we have the highest concentration of science and technical talent in the country, working at our federal labs and our universities and our big technology-driven companies here in Virginia. How many of them, Bharat Uncle, might see an opportunity to take their idea into the market through crowdfunding, raise that initial capital, give it a shot, and if enough of them do so, we'll see the success of these companies create tens of thousands of jobs and give hope to the next generation that they can not only live in Virginia but thrive for their children and grandchildren. That's our future together if we implement these ideas the right way.
Well, it would seem to me that if it's somebody has some item of consumer interest, if you have hundreds of investors, then they can also be your customers.
You got it. This is how restaurants will raise money. This is how retailing businesses will raise money. We are just scratching the surface. But let me give you an example of what the state can do. Virginia today has a $5 million angel investor tax credit. Today it's only accessible to millionaires. But with crowdfunding, this session, bipartisan piece of legislation has come forward unanimously so that when these crowdfunding policies are put into place, those of us who put in $50, $100, or $1,000 can just as easily access that tax credit as the big folks. And that's a great opportunity to democratize this wonderful opportunity to invest in new businesses, which again will reinforce the notion that Virginia is on the move.
Let's take a couple of seconds to something you mentioned before. Is there anything special you have in mind in facilitating entrepreneurship to minorities, women, and other underserved communities?
Well, first and foremost, we know that mentorship and support systems matter. Through programs like Startup Virginia, which is free and available to anyone, you can participate and connect to support services in every corner of the Commonwealth. As I mentioned, over 600 are participating today, 34% of whom are minority-led, and 27% of whom are women-led businesses already. But even beyond that, as a politician who wishes to serve in our government, we need to do our fair part. When Governor Kane was in office, we launched a SWAM dashboard, a transparency program led by my dear friend Vivek Kundra, who helped us to create transparency so that the public knows how much of our government dollars are going to small, women, and minority-owned businesses. In the Kane years, it jumped from roughly 15% to over 40% because we shine light on the opportunity. We'll do that again in the Chopra efforts.
I am sold. So now let's get down to the nuts and bolts. When are the primaries and what can our viewers do to make this dream come true?
If you believe in this vision, I'll be running for office and the election is June 11th. My website, teamchopra.org, allows you to join as a volunteer. If you wish to be reminded, because you may not remember the vote is on June 11th, please text me at 67076. Enter the word vote and your zip code so we know where you are in Virginia to tell you exactly how and where you should go to vote. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Sure, but can you clarify one more thing though? You are running as a Democrat, but for the primaries in Virginia, am I right that you could be
open.
registered in any, but they can vote for
Virginia
you?
is an open primary.
That's
Any
so
one of you
wonderful.
with any backgrounds, you don't have to be a Democrat on paper, anyone can join, and I hope you'll participate on June 11th.
Well, I really do wish you great luck, and I hope our viewers will also be supporting you. Thank you for joining me in Dialogue, Anish.
Thank you for having me on your inaugural episode.
This is Bharat Bhargav. Thank you for joining me in Dialogue.